welcome back to Just Code It. Today we're going to be taking a look at LangGraph, specifically conditional routing, essentially the decision making between nodes and edges. To get started, we're just going to do our imports and create a session state. And it might make sense to take a look at the graph we're going to make as well. This is the end graph. We're going to have it split into 3 nodes from the router. We're going to have it go straight ahead to the square root. If it's 0, we just have it do nothing and essentially go the 0 route. Then come back together and all meet at the end. We're making 3 decisions on this node and then ending up at the end. We're going to start by creating a session state. Nothing too fancy on this one. It's just a number state with the number and then the result. After that, we need to create our node functions. We start out, we're going to start with the absolute value calculator. Here, if the number is negative, we're going to take the absolute value. That function takes the absolute value of the number and returns the state with the new absolute value set in the results. And most of these are going to be very similar to this. Essentially, I'm going to fly through them. We have square root. It's the exact same thing, just squared. And we have a 0 where we check for 0. And then finally, we get to the router. The router is the logic of LangGraph, essentially. What it does is it decides which edge to take to the next node. We're just going to look at the number, and if it's positive, we're going to go positive branch. We haven't declared this yet, so hold on. It's a little confusing right now, but we'll declare creating our structure of our graph. These have to stay the same and are used elsewhere. Just keep that in mind. Then we return positive branch, negative branch, and 0 branch. As you can see, those are the edge decisions right there. Positive, negative, and 0. It's starting to get more and more similar to the image. Next up, we're going to start building that graph. To build it, we're going to create a graph object using state graph and then give it our initial state. Then we're going to add some nodes, the square node, the absolute value node, and the 0 node, which all are given this string. This is essentially going to make a dictionary and then give it the function name. Next, we're going to give it the router. After creating all of our node functions, we're going to start putting together this graph and getting the structure of it down. To do this, we're going to first start out with creating our graph state. This is probably pretty familiar to you right now, but what we're going to do is do graph equal to state graph and then pass it our initial state. After creating the graph, we're going to add our 3 nodes. As you can see, these are the absolute node, the square node, and the 0 node. Nothing too fancy there. Then we have something that throws some people a curveball if they're not familiar with Lambda functions. What you need to do for router nodes is use a Lambda function because it's not actually changing the state. Every node function in LangGraph needs to return the state and change the state. Since it doesn't do that and it just makes decisions on the state without returning any changes to the state, we use a Lambda function. If you are not super into Lambda functions, you can essentially create a method which just returns the state. It's a pass-through function and doesn't change anything, but that's essentially what the router is doing. And then we would do router and pass it through that node. The router would be outside of the node function there and would be able to work. After you understand what we're doing, we're going to come down here and add that router node. Let's also add the pass-through method below it, but we'll just comment it out for now. What we're doing is setting that dictionary variable to router to that Lambda function. The Lambda function is essentially this pass-through function that just returns itself. Then we create a node with that. So router and then pass-through node if you want to do it that way. Next, we're going to be defining our edges. We're going to have that start node or that entry point, and then it's going to go straight into the router. That's the first edge. Then we're going to add a graph.add conditional edges. Here you can add as many edges as you want. I actually don't know the limit for LangGraph. You can get pretty crazy with it if you have a lot of conditions. For our use case, we're just going to be adding 3, easier to look at. After creating the router and adding it to that start node using this edge, we then create those conditional edges. To do that, we do graph.add Add conditional edges. We're going to start with our router. Let's see if I can get the documentation up here. Source, then the path. That's essentially the decision making. Finally, we give it a dictionary with the mapping of the path. We give it the function to actually calculate the path. And then after that, we go through and essentially just make a dictionary mapping this path to the node. Positive branch is right here. Positive branch. Actually, I'm going to do this real quick. I'm going to jump off for a sec, probably. It'll be easier to show you all in one. Let's get rid of these nodes. I don't really care for them anymore. Okay, now this will be easier to jump around. What we're doing here is we're essentially saying the start node and then how it makes its decision. So that function, and then that function, remember, we're returning these values are going to line up with the values inside of this dictionary. And those values will map to the name of the next node. This node, positive, goes to the square, negative goes to absolute, and 0 goes to 0 node. After that, we are going to make all those individual edges because there's no more decisions, and they all go to the absorbing state or the end state, where we do add edge and we just end at the end state, and that's about it for that. And we compile. Look at that, it didn't fail. Let's see if the other way works as well. Yep, looks like that works just fine as well. Now we actually have our full graph created. We can start taking a look at it. To do this, we're going to use the graphing functionality and just graph it. And then I'm also saving it to a mermaid file. That is the graph. Nothing fancy there. It's just nice to see it visually. The mermaid files also look like this. The last thing we have to do is essentially just test to make sure the graph works. To do this, we're just going to write a simple function that loops over these numbers, passes it into the graph, invokes the graph, and then prints the output. Here we can see 5 goes to 25 because it is positive, 3 gets absolute valued, and then 0 goes nowhere. That is it for decision making in LangGraph. If you enjoyed today's video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.